So where did races come from, right? Because, if we haven't had millions of years to evolve different skin tones, because that's complex, right? Where do they come from? So, first of all, we can talk about migration patterns. And you've probably heard this called the out of Africa hypothesis. But if you look at a map, you'll notice that out of Africa naturally means out of the Middle East, because you have to go through the Middle East in order to get to the rest of the world. And so the secular model for human migration patterns exactly mirrors what you would predict from the Bible, with one exception, that L1 and L2 there in Africa, we would predict that the arrows are flipped the other way. So you can remember that and see if they have to flip those later. But basically, we came out of the Middle East. We came out of that area and then spread through to the rest of the world. We can tell that from genetic evidence. Sorry, I wasn't getting into the technicalities, but basically you can tell who's related to who and plot out gradients. So races turn out to be a bit disappointing. Basically, they're more of a social construct than anything else. The way that genetics works is a bit digital. So you have a switch, and it can be one way or the other. So these are actually two kids that, for all intents and purposes, look physiologically identical, but they have different skin tones. Turns out that this actually happens a lot, and it's just that we're not comfortable talking about it. But I'm going to talk about it here. So when you start having people with a diverse lineage, when they have all the genes mixed back together, you can get even like fraternal twins that look like they're different races. Because it's just flipping a switch on skin tone, something like that. So there's nothing deeply intrinsic about this. It's just that skin tone is something that's really easy to spot. But there's actually a strange lack of variation in the human genome as compared to every other species on the planet, which is, by the way, evidence that we went through a recent bottleneck. But humans are almost clones to each other. It's a very small amount of difference. So yeah, basically the races just kind of popped out as a what we call a founder effect, if I can use that term, and they kind of happened all at once. So what about Neanderthals? What about Homo erectus? What about all of these kind of early human species things? When we're talking about high-quality fossil record, I found these little bone fragments, and it actually turns out it's from a pig, not a person. But when we're talking about like complete skulls like this, it turns out that we're looking at the same sort of thing. So this is our currently up-to-date, as of, I think this is like 2008, model of what a Neanderthal would look like. And I would say that if you ran across this person and they weren't wearing leathers, you would have a hard time telling the difference between this and a quote-unquote modern human. And it turns out that's really what's going on here, is that this is not that they're more primitive than us. They're just they're about as different from Europeans as Europeans are to Africans. They're a slightly different race, and but there's no reason to think that they're not just regular people. I've seen other people point out that Chuck Norris looks a lot like Neanderthal. And I was actually at a keynote presentation where they did the Neanderthal genome sequencing. So this is how small the differences are. So we have 3 billion letters that make up the human genome. And when they did the Neanderthal genome sequencing project, they found 87 letters that were different from the rest of humans. So 87 out of 3 billion. You do the math on that, but I think it's 0.00000. It's a very small fraction. And it turns out, actually, what really happened was, if you look at the distribution of Neanderthal sites, that most of them are European. And so what actually happened was that they interbred with Europeans. So Neanderthals didn't go extinct at all. They lost their distinctiveness. And so this right here is actually This is actually the 2.7% there is actually my 23andMe profile. So for $100, you can go get a 23andMe gene profile, and they'll say what percentage of your ancestors were Neanderthals. So I actually have more Neanderthal ancestry than I have Asian ancestry. So that's what happened to it. So hopefully this will help you to stop being racist in the future. But it's true. We do this even with modern humans. We sort of assume that, oh, well, those Greeks, they didn't know what they were talking about, or, oh, well, those ancient peoples, they were probably all morons. But genetically, they're identical to us, so there's actually no reason to think that they're morons. I mean, honestly, could you guys build a microwave if you were, removed from civilization? Could you build all of this modern technology? I mean, people have a hard time using smartphones, much less building one from scratch, right? So that's more of what's going on. Okay, and I think that's where I'm going to leave it off for right now. So that's the main bulk of the presentation. What I thought was kind of the core critical stuff to condense 4 hours worth of presentation into about 1.5 hours. So I can